Okay, good. All right, now it's working. So hopefully this is not an issue for anyone else trying to tune in, but this is the information session for the affordable units at Redtail Crossing, Phase 1 in Wrentham. Can the folks who are attending by YouTube, would one of you mind just confirming that you can hear me? If you can just type in the box to the right of where you see me. I just want to make sure you can hear me before I move forward. I know my household who's on the phone can hear me, but if one of you can just type anything saying you can hear me, that would be great. Stephanie just waiting for a response here.
Yep,
Great. Thank you, Jen. So this is the information session for the affordable units at Redtail Crossing Phase 1. My name is David Cashman. I work at SEB Housing. We are the affordable lottery agent who's been hired by the development team to assist them in running a lottery and helping people through this process. The goal tonight is to just kind of highlight some of the most important pieces of information that I think may be of interest to you about what this opportunity is and what you can expect going forward if you want to apply. This information session is for your benefit. So if at any time you have a question, please feel free to, if you're on YouTube, you can just type it and I'll stop where I am and answer it. Or to Stephanie on the phone call, if you have a question at some point, please let me know and I'm happy to address it. So as the name sort of implies, there's more than one phase. This is just the first phase. This development is, I think it's technically 3 phases, but phases 2 and 3 are going to be offered through one lottery. And the units in phase 1 are kind of more close together, I think, where they're starting to build. And then obviously phases 2 and 3 will be developed slightly later on in time. But in total, there's going to be 100 townhouse style units in the development. 7 units are being offered, 7 affordable units are being offered in this phase 1. And phase 2 will have 18 affordable units. The units are being offered in 2 and 3 bedrooms. No 1 bedrooms are available. So this is just 2 and 3 bedrooms. Each unit has its own garage, driveway, and patios. There's a lot of open areas, walking trails nearby, stainless steel appliances on the interior of the units, energy efficient appliances, air conditioning, in-unit washers and dryers, and wood style flooring. So these are nice brand new units. What is affordable housing? Well, there's many different affordable housing programs. This is just one of them. And those programs have vastly different requirements. So one thing that's kind of important to highlight in this program, and I'll talk in more specifics later, but essentially the rents here are offered at a price that's considerably less than they would be on the market. And households, in order to qualify, have to meet certain income criteria. But what's important to note, and I'll speak more to this later, is households are expected to be able to support the rent on their own. So this is not a subsidized affordable housing program. The rents are not tied to any particular applicant's specific income and asset circumstances. The rents are what they are, and applicants need to be able to support those rents on the strength of their own income and assets. So I think I may have said 8 earlier. If I did, that was a mistake. I apologize. So there are 7 affordable units being offered in this phase 1, and those are broken down. There will be 4 2-bedroom units and 3 3-bedroom units. One of each is built out with features for persons with mobility impairments. All units, both the 2 bedrooms and 3 bedrooms, have 2.5 bathrooms. The rent for a 2-bedroom unit is $1,904 per month. and the rent for a 3-bedroom unit is $2,197 per month. Now, important note too about those rents is that those do not include certain utilities. So any tenants would be responsible for their heat, which is gas, their water heating, which is gas, and electricity, which includes cooking. Looks like water and cold water and sewer would be included in the rent. Pets are allowed with certain restrictions that apply. The first step in this process is to apply and be eligible for the affordable program, and we're going to go into those details in just a moment here. And then if you are eligible, you'll kind of move to step 2, which is applying with the leasing office. And I just want to kind of make that distinction here. We, SEB Housing, we're not the developer. We don't own the development or any of the buildings in it. We're also not the leasing office. We're the affordable housing consultant. So what we're kind of doing is this upfront work to see if you're eligible for the program, qualifying any households that apply. That's kind of all part of step 1. We run a lottery, and then we pass off those households to the leasing office in step 2, which again I will discuss in detail a little bit later. And at that point, you would work with the leasing office to see if you're lease eligible, because one thing you want to keep in mind here is program eligibility is different than lease eligibility. So what is program eligibility? Well, households have to have income and assets that are under the thresholds outlined by the program. More on that in a moment. Household priority for the units will be given based on household size and composition. That's not really so much of a requirement, but when we talk about the lottery a little bit later on and how we make the waiting lists and priorities, that will become more apparent. If anyone owns a home, for better or worse in this program, you can't own a home upon move-in, so you would have to sell your home if you do own a home before signing a lease. And finally, if any household has some sort of financial interest or relationship in the development or relationship to the developer or the management team, that would be a disqualifying factor. But again, the kind of the program requirement that kind of is the biggest one that comes up the most is the income requirement. There are these income ceilings. Some households do own homes, and if you do, we'll work with you on that. You have to sell the home. It's pretty infrequent that households have a financial interest or are related to someone in the development team. It happens, but that is by no means, as big of a consideration, I don't think, as the income ceiling, which is what we'll talk about now. So when you submit your application, and that is the most important takeaway you can have from this evening, is if you think you're eligible and you're interested, get your application in on time. You have until the end of this month to do so. And if you haven't already looked at it or started working on it, the application is fairly intensive. It's kind of rigorous. We understand that it's, you could say it's a bit of a pain, but that's to make sure that households who we qualify are eligible for the program and are the households who should be occupying these units. But the application takes some time. It does. I know it does take some effort. Oftentimes it takes more than one submission to get a totally complete application. So I can't stress enough, after watching this, after you've kind of looked through the application, read through the information packet some, if this is an opportunity you're interested in, get working on that application sooner rather than later, because you don't want to wait till July 30th to submit, because chances are you may need to do some further work on it to complete it. And if you've waited till the 30th, you're not going to have so much time to do that. So what are the income limits? Those are based on the household size. So whoever's applying with you is going to be living in the unit. That's your household size. So if it's just you, your household size of 1, you can make up to $67,400. That's your gross income for the year. That's the maximum amount that the program allows. And that goes all the way up to a 6-person household size. The limit for a 6-person household size is $111,650. Those income limits are listed in the information packet, and they're also in the application, so you can just kind of take a quick look there. But again, it's who's going to be living in the unit, who's going to be on the lease. That's the relevant sort of household size. And when you're applying, you want to kind of, you're going to have to list who those people are, and you want to think about it with some serious thought, because once we've run the lottery, you can't necessarily just sort of add someone who you decide you want to have come live with you. Dropping someone maybe, depends, but so generally speaking, the people you put on your application should be the same exact people who are going to be moving into the unit. Income in this program is defined pretty broadly, okay? And that's not something that SEB just kind of makes up out of thin air. That's based on the rules and regulations that govern the program. And so when you start filling out the application, you'll see that there are a lot of these different types of income sources that we list and that we require you to check off as either, yes, I have that, and then list what that is. Or if it's not applicable, then you need to indicate that it's not applicable because you don't have it. But what you'll see is that income is, the sort of most common thing that most people think about when they think about income is how much money do I make from my job. But there are other sources of income that this program counts as well. So, if you have sort of a main 9-to-5 job that you do, but then you're a little bit, but you're self-employed on the side and you work a couple nights or weekends here and there, well, that's income. If you collect child support or alimony, that's income. If you collect disability, that's income. If you have a pension that's paying out, that's income. Workman's compensation. If you are someone who gets periodic payments from a family member or a friend or loved one to help you out with some of your daily expenses, that's great, but that's probably income, right? If someone's giving you $300 a month to help with groceries, that's great, but we have to probably count that on top of if you have a job or something. So again, I don't need to list all the different sources of income, but I think the kind of takeaway is income is counted broadly, and we list a lot of the different sources in the application. There may be some we don't list, but if you know that you have another income source, it is incumbent upon you to list what that is and the amount of the income that you get from it. Generally speaking, income is sort of a projection going forward. Obviously, any projection going forward over the next 12 months factors in what you've been making. So we need to see kind of what you've been making recently and do our level best to project that out over the next 12 months. We understand that that's necessarily an imperfect kind of methodology. Things could change, but your most recent income is obviously the best predictor of income going forward. And so oftentimes that's kind of what we have to use. So again, income limits are listed by household size, and they're right there in the information packet in the application. So you don't have to memorize it, or I know I didn't list all of them because it's all right there. So just take a look at those documents. You'll see it. And again, that's your gross income for all the persons in the household who would be moving in. The program doesn't really have any minimum incomes, but as I said at the beginning, in this program, households are expected to be able to support the rent on their own. And so the leasing office wants to make sure that households have enough income to support the rent, because it really doesn't do an applicant any good, and it doesn't do the leasing office any good if someone is program eligible, meaning that they're under the income limits that I just discussed, but they don't have nearly enough to be able to comfortably support the rent each month. So it wouldn't do anyone any good to qualify such a person for the lottery knowing that at the end of the road, they're going to apply with the leasing office, who's going to say, hey, we're really sorry, but you don't make enough money to meet our lease screening criteria. So in order to sort of tide off that possibility, we do a less rigorous screening to ensure that households have enough to support the rent. And again, that is a much less rigorous screening than we do with respect to the maximum income, because again, the maximum income is a program limit, whereas the minimum income is sort of the leasing office's criteria to make sure that you can afford the rent. And so we don't want to disqualify someone on that ground if the leasing office might count income a little bit differently than we do. So I should note the minimum income and assets, the minimum income also factors in sort of what your assets are. And it also has no application if you have a Section 8 voucher or some other type of voucher. So if you have a voucher, disregard what I'm about to say. But basically, the leasing office's lease screening criteria is 40%, meaning that the rent that you would pay each month shouldn't be more than 40% of your income. Stated another way, your income should be 2.5 times what the rent is. So what does that factor in? What does that actually mean in numbers? That means for a 2-bedroom, in order to meet the leasing office's lease screening criteria, you would need to make approximately $57,000, or I should say have approximately $57,000 between your income and your assets. For a 3-bedroom unit, that means you would need to make or have between your income and your assets almost $66,000. So when you submit your documentation, we will look at that. If you're close, we're not going to screen you out, So if you, like I said, roughly for a 3-bedroom, in order to comfortably support the rent and meet the leasing office's lease screening criteria, you need to make about $66,000 or have about $66,000 between your income and your assets. If you have 63 or 62, chances are we're going to say, hey, that's good enough for SEB. You're close, okay? But does that mean that the leasing office might not say to you, hey, you're close, but you're not close enough? We're really sorry, you don't meet our criteria. So that is something to keep in mind. Those minimum income and asset limits are listed on page 5 of the info packet. And I'll touch on this again later, but the sort of the importance of this is that, we are primarily concerned whether you're program eligible. We do a look at your income and assets to see if it looks like you're close. But we are not doing lease screening. We're not doing credit checks or any of that other stuff. And so in this regard, our saying that you're eligible for the program and entering you into the lottery is not a guarantee that you actually, meet the leasing office's lease screening criteria. So I hope I haven't confused anyone by that. Again, quick takeaway is we're doing a rigorous look at your income to make sure you aren't above the income limits for the program, and we'll also do a much a less rigorous look to make sure that you have sufficient amount to meet the leasing office's lease screening criteria. Okay, assets like income, broadly defined in the program. You will see that there are various types of assets that we list in the program application that you need to go through and list whether you have it and how much, and provide documentation, or you need to say not applicable because you don't have that. And if you have other assets that aren't listed there, it is incumbent upon you to indicate what those are. The thing about, assets is there's no asset limit. So, having a lot in assets is not necessarily going to disqualify you the way having a huge income would if it puts you over the income limit. So there's no, in the vast majority of cases, there's really nothing to be gained by trying to sort of hide or not disclose what your assets are, because again, there's no asset limit. Now, that being said, assets sometimes generate income, right? Oftentimes, like a bank account or something like that doesn't generate much, but it might if you have a ton or you're getting a good rate of return because you have it in I think it's a certificate of deposit account where you can't touch it for a certain number of months. Maybe you get a decent return on it. And there are various types of assets, some of which produce, very little return, some of which are better. But the point is, if an asset generates income, we need to add that income to your income total. For most households, this does not become an issue. It really only becomes an issue if, in most cases, if you're really kind of up against that income total just based on, your job. And so the income from an asset that you have could bump you up over the income limit. But again, this is not something that happens with that much frequency because, most people just, I shouldn't say most, oftentimes people don't have assets that generate a ton in income. And oftentimes applicants aren't right up against the income limit just based on the income that they have from their job and other income sources. So when you fill out the application, list all your different asset sources. If you own a home, that will need to be sold before you can sign a lease. And again, the sort of biggest takeaway from assets is just there isn't an asset limit, but assets generate income, and that income needs to be applied towards any other income that you have in assessing whether you are under the income limit that's established by the program. Okay. Sometimes people wonder, and this is sort of moving forward, but this is a question that comes up, could I have a co-signer or a guarantor on my lease? That is not allowed by the program. So, I was talking a little bit before about having a sufficient amount in income and assets to support the rent. And if anyone's sort of thinking, well, maybe I don't quite meet that, but maybe I could have, mom or dad co-sign for me or a friend or someone, that would not be permitted. When you fill out your application, one of the first questions is going to ask you what household type you are. We've broken down the different household types. There's only three. You can be a household type 1, a household type 2, and a household type 3. And those just correspond to the number of bedrooms that a household of your type would need. Okay, so a household type 3 is a household who, according to the program, needs 3 bedrooms. And a household type 2 is a household who, according to the program, needs 2 bedrooms. And a type 1 is a household who only needs 1 bedroom. There are examples of each. They're all listed in the info pack. But just to give you a couple quick samples, any one-person household, so if it's just one person, you are always going to be a type 1 household. Any 5-person household, on the contrary, is always going to be a type 3 household, meaning they're a household who's always going to need 3 bedrooms. 3-person households, it depends on the makeup of your household. If it's a married couple with a child, that's a type 2 household. The program would say the married couple can share a bedroom and the child could get the other, so they only need 2 bedrooms. But if it's a parent and 2 children, conversely, the program would say they're a type 3 household. They need 3 bedrooms. Now, when I talk in a little bit about the lottery, I will talk a little bit more about why this matters, the household type that you are. And it does matter when we do the lottery rankings and results. But when you fill out your application, and it's usually pretty straightforward what household type you are. But if you're not sure, you can always get in touch with us and we can help you work through it. But it is, it's important to get that right because just for example, and you'll see this later, if you are in fact a household type 3, but you list yourself as a household type 2, you may prejudice yourself or disadvantage yourself for a 3-bedroom unit if that's something that you're applying for. And on that front, I should say, I had mentioned that the units are 2 bedrooms and 3 bedrooms. If you are interested in both, check off both on the second page of your third page of your application, the lottery application. There's no disadvantage whatsoever to checking off both. Where there could be a disadvantage is if you said now on your application, hey, I just want to apply for a 2-bedroom, and then later on, after the lottery, you've said, actually, I've changed my mind. I wish I had applied for a 3-bedroom. At that point, it's kind of too late. It doesn't hurt you at all to list both. If you think you could be interested in both, I can't sort of suggest strongly enough, just check off both. And at some point later on, you may get a choice, but that's better than wishing you had selected one when you didn't. So the deadline to submit your lottery application is July 31st. And again, if you think you're interested, get it in early, because the vast majority of households need more than one try to get it totally complete. And on that front, I should say, this is not a one bite at the apple type of situation. It's not like you submit the application once, and if there's an issue with it, too bad, and the process is over for you. Not remotely. If you submit an application, we will correspond with you within, a matter of just a couple of days, letting you know exactly, if there's anything missing, if there's anything that needs further clarification. And that can be an iterative process. It can, maybe you need 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times to get it fully complete. That happens. And so I can't stress enough, get your application in early, because you really don't want to be bumping up against that deadline trying to track down documentation. If you're eligible for the lottery, we'll send you a letter with a lot of details about when the lottery will be, what you applied for, what household type you are, who you applied with, the names of the people that you listed in your application. Read that closely. Make sure that it's consistent with what you intended or what you put in your application. It will have a lottery application number. That number will be in the form of A. blank blank blank. So if you are the first household to submit a completed application to us, you will be household lottery number A.001. Okay, if you're the second, you'll be A.002, and so on and so forth. Those numbers have absolutely no bearing on anything other than keeping your information anonymous when we do the lottery. So don't sort of take A.001 as, oh, I won or something like that. It doesn't mean that, okay? It just means here's your anonymous identifier that we'll be using in the lottery. The lottery will be on August 12th, okay? Every household who is eligible for the lottery will be put in the drawing, okay? And so these lotteries are really different than what most people generally think of when they think of a lottery. When we usually think of a lottery, we think of there's winners, there's losers, only a certain number of people get picked and the other people go home kind of sore losers. That is not how this works, okay? The way this works is everyone who is eligible for the lottery will get picked. And then once they're picked, we have to sort the results according to certain preferences, okay? The sort of relevant preferences here are the household type that you are, whether you qualify for local preference, and whether you need a disabled accessible apartment, because there are 2 of those. So, household type. I said before, a household type 3 is a household who needs 3 bedrooms, and a household type 2 is a household who needs 2 bedrooms. So for the 3-bedroom units, what that means is that when we do the lottery, every type 3 household who applies for a 3-bedroom unit will get priority over every type 2 household. Again, this does not matter. It doesn't matter when they're drawn relative to one another. So a type 2 household who lists on their lottery application that they want a 3-bedroom unit, if they are the very first household who's picked in the lottery, and the next 5 households picked in the lottery are type 3 households who also applied for a 3-bedroom unit, then those 5 type 3 households are going to leapfrog the type 2 household on the waiting list for the 3-bedroom unit. And again, that's because the program requires that we implement these preferences, which say type 3 households should always have priority for a 3-bedroom unit over type 2 households, regardless where they're picked in the lottery. For the 2-bedroom units, it doesn't make any difference whether you're a type 3 or a type 2, because both of them could need or use 2 bedrooms, and so they get equal priority. They would get priority over any type 1 household. Okay, so that is sort of the relevance of the household type, is when we do the lottery sorting. Household type 3s get priority over household type 2s for 3-bedroom units, and household types 3 and 2 get equal priority for 2-bedroom units over households who are type 1. There is also a local preference in this lottery for some of the units, not all of the units. And what that means is, to qualify for local preference, you have to live in Wrentham, work in Wrentham or for the town of Wrentham, or have a child going to the Wrentham schools. How that manifests when we run the lottery is that, and again, this is not for all of the units, it's only for 5 of them, but for 5 of the units, or sorry, 4 of the units, not 5, 4 of the units, there is a local preference that needs to be implemented. And so what that means is that, as an example, for a 3-bedroom unit, a type 3 household who lives in Wrentham and qualifies for local preference will get priority on the waiting list over a type 3 household who does not qualify for local preference, does not live in Wrentham, does not work in Wrentham, does not have a child attending the Wrentham schools. Okay? For the disabled units, again, only households who need those features will be on those lists. If there aren't households who need them on those lists, they can be made available to other households, but that's only if there are no households who need them. I talked a little bit about the waiting list. So again, I said every household will be drawn in the lottery, and every household will be on a waiting list, and there will be several waiting lists generated by the lottery. Now, you may not get the exact position on a waiting list that you'd hoped for, but you will have a spot, okay? So people always sort of default to our general conceptions about lottery and ask about winners, losers, will winners be picked, etc. That language isn't really applicable to the lotteries that we run, and that's because everyone gets a waiting list position. So there aren't really winners or losers, just that some people have better waiting list positions than others. The waiting lists, in turn, determine the order that households will get to move forward in the next step in this process. And the next step in this process is we will, on the night of the lottery, we will send you the waiting list, not with your names, with your application numbers, and they will be ordered top to bottom in order of priority. And so when you see those, that's when you kind of really have a sense of when you can expect to move forward. We will share those with you, and we will also share them with the leasing office. And we will provide you with their contact information, and we will also provide all of your contact information to them. And then at that point, the leasing office will start engaging with households in step 2 of this process, which is to apply and hopefully qualify for a lease. So we, SEB, are not involved in that process because, again, we're not the leasing office. but we will be in contact with them and sort of supporting them through that process if there are any issues that come up. So again, any household that's on a waiting list has already been screened by SEB Housing for program eligibility. But again, that has nothing to do really with your lease eligibility. So it is quite possible that a household could be program eligible, but not meet the leasing office's criteria for lease eligibility. So perhaps a household has really bad credit, and the leasing office says, "I'm quite sorry, you're not lease eligible," or maybe there's some other really poor kind of rental history that wouldn't meet the leasing office's criteria. So the important thing to kind of keep in mind is that if you have submitted a lottery application and been deemed eligible, that's great. That means you've taken a big step towards moving forward in this process, but it's not the end of the road. And our entering you into the lottery does not say anything about whether you're eligible for a lease, because we don't do that screening. We don't ask for that documentation. We're not going to ask you for landlord references or credit check, or to see what if you have a criminal background or any of those things that leasing offices may look at. We are not going to ask for those, because that is not the screening that we do. When the leasing office reaches out to you, chances are they're going to there will be some time limit attached to move forward in the process, right? This isn't sort of an open-ended invitation to move forward whenever you might feel like it. And that's sort of for obvious reasons, because they have units that they want to fill. And also because there are, just out of fairness to other households that are behind you on the waiting list who are interested in this opportunity. So if that's you after the lottery, you're going to want to make sure to pay attention and respond to, the invite to move forward with the leasing office by any deadlines that they might give you. What that also means is for households who don't have one of those very top waiting list positions, you should not hang your head and think, well, this process is over for me. That's too bad, because sometimes households ahead of you don't end up reserving units for one reason or another. Maybe they change their mind, don't want to live there. Maybe they are in multiple lotteries and they decide they want to live at a different development. Maybe they don't meet the leasing office's lease screening criteria, et cetera, et cetera. So there could be many reasons why a household doesn't end up leasing one of the units, which means that even if you don't have one of the top lottery waiting list positions, your turn could come up. So don't despair if you don't get one of those really top positions. Just kind of be patient. I can tell you that many leasing offices have to screen 2 to 3, sometimes even 4 people to fill one unit. Okay, not always, but that definitely does happen. And so again, that's just reinforcement of this idea that if you're not one of the very top households on the waiting list, doesn't mean that your turn won't come up, because it could. We're almost 40 minutes in. I haven't had any questions yet. Does anyone have any questions about what I've said, or is everything perfectly crystal clear? And yeah. Did you have a question, ma'am? Nope.
Oh, I thought it was up here. Can I ask, yes, 2 things. When are they looking for phase 1 for move-in dates? Do you have any idea?
I think units are ready like pretty soon. You'd have to ask the leasing office. I know that sometimes these things can change a little bit, and with the pandemic going on, that can further complicate things. But I believe that units are expected to be ready within the next month or 2, I want to say. But they could confirm that with you. Oh,
okay, then go ahead.
No, go ahead. That just reminded me of something else. But yep, what's your next question?
So now with the phase 2 and 3, I know you said that probably they're going to be further down in the future. would you have to go through the whole same process again, or would your documentation that's sent in be good and you could just fill out a new application for it?
Okay, so I'm just going to repeat that for anyone who's watching the YouTube. So the question from the caller was, if they applied for this, but then, something happened and ultimately they were interested in a unit or phase 2 or phase 3, could the documentation that they submitted for this lottery be used for a unit in phase 2 or phase 3? And the answer is maybe. It depends on what document it is and how much time has elapsed. I would say generally you can't count on it because the documentation typically has to be current. So just by way of example, when you're submitting your application, you have to submit your three most recent bank statements and 5 most recent pay stubs. So those are obviously going to be well past, those are going to have to be updated. And there are other documents that likely will have to be updated too. So I guess I would say there may be a few documents or some documents that we could use, but I wouldn't count on it. If you're going to end up, applying again for phase 2 or phase 3, you're probably looking at a separate application with updated documentation. One other thing I'd say on the waiting list is, you keep your spot. So, even if you don't get to move forward in renting a unit now with one of the units in phase 1, but you're next up on the waiting list, in a year from now, if one of the households moves out, assuming you're still interested, you would have that first waiting list position if you were wanting to move into that unit. I should have mentioned at the beginning, and I forgot, but you reminded me, so thank you. The units have all been pre-approved, okay? And what that means is that the state which reviews this has said that they are, sort of fairly laid out, and they're not sort of identifiable as affordable units from the outside. They're kind of interspersed within the development. They're not all clustered together and next to one another. And so that's a really nice feature. In fact, these are all duplex homes, and I can, just looking at the site plan right now, none of the affordable units are right next to each other. Okay, so they're really kind of littered throughout the development and sort of proportionally reflect the different units within the development. And so that's a really nice feature of this program. Someone just sort of walking through couldn't say, oh, that's a market rate unit and that's an affordable unit. Though that would not be apparent to someone walking through there, or perhaps even living there. Okay. So
they're not putting the affordable side by side. So you might have someone paying market rent next to affordable. They're not going to have the two affordable side by side. Because I'll be honest, I drove by the site and it is very nice.
Yeah.
The site area and what they're making, it's a really nice area. I will say there is no public transportation there. That's one thing people need to keep in mind. But it is a really nice area.
Yeah. So just reiterating the question about the placement of the affordable units, and again, there are no 2 affordable units that are side by side. So every affordable unit will be next to a market rate unit. So again, step 1, we've talked about submitted application, give us, all the program documentation. We know it's a lot, but we'll work through it with you and try and make it as painless as possible. If you're eligible, you get a lottery application number. In August, we'll run the lottery. It'll be via YouTube and on a phone call, just like this. Draw the application numbers, the A.00 whatever, out of a box. That will give you some indication of where you may be on the waiting list, but it doesn't give you the full picture, because after the lottery, that same night, I have to sort the results again, according to those preferences that we talked about, the household type, local preference, need for a disabled unit. I will then create the waiting list. Those will be in order. of who's going to get to move forward at what time relative to the other households. I will send that to you the very same night of the lottery, provide you the information for the leasing office, give your information in the waiting list to the leasing office so you can be in touch with each other. You will then move into step 2, which is applying for a lease with the leasing office, looking at criteria that we, SDB Housing, aren't really looking at. When it's your turn to apply for a lease, you can select from any of the available units. So, there isn't like a correlation between, the first household on this list gets this unit and the second household on this list gets this unit and the first household on that list gets that unit. That's not how it works, which is nice. So if you're the number 1 household on the 2-bedroom waiting list, you'll get to pick from any of the available 2-bedroom units within phase 1. And if you're the first household on the 3-bedroom waiting list, you'll get to pick from any of the 3-bedroom households that are available. And once you've reserved a unit, then the household behind you will get to select from any of the remaining units. So you'll have some choice, which is nice. You're not sort of forced into a particular unit, and that can also be nice in terms of timing. I don't know exactly what the delivery of these units are, but I would guess, given that they're duplexes, they won't all be available at exactly the same time. And so, there could be weeks or even months potentially between, and that's usually the case, even in big, big buildings where all the units are just in one building. They're usually not all available on exactly the same date. So that can be a really good thing as an affordable applicant, because maybe you don't want the unit that's ready in a month. You want the one that's ready in 3 months because you're trying to finish out your current lease, or there's some other circumstance that having a little bit more time is beneficial to you. So you will have your pick, and you can speak to the leasing office and see what the available units are, where they're located, what they look like, and when they're going to be ready, and choose the unit that is most appropriate for you that's still available from your waiting list. I guess that's the other piece, right? The waiting list. So, if you have a really high 2-bedroom waiting list position and the leasing office starts inviting households from the 2-bedroom, and you have a lower position on the 3-bedroom list, you don't get to just grab a 3-bedroom. You have to wait till they invite you from the 3-bedroom list. So you would, if you're on the 2-bedroom list and you're number 1, you can pick from any of the available 2-bedrooms. And if you're also on the 3-bedroom, then if and when you're invited from the 3-bedroom list, you can pick from any of the available 3-bedrooms. One of the nice features about this program is there's a nice cushion built in. So in terms of income for tenants. So we talked a little bit earlier on about what the income limits are to be eligible for the program. Every year you have to recertify to show that you're still eligible for the program. But when you do, the income limit that applies to you will be substantially greater than it is when you're initially applying. So just by way of example, right now, as a household size of 1, you can make up to $67,400. If you end up renting a unit and a year from now, you have to recertify showing that you're still eligible for the program, that you didn't win the lottery during that year, and now you you have way too much money to qualify. So when you recertify, the income limit that will be applicable to you is not $67,400. Now it bumps all the way up to $94,360. So there's a really nice cushion that's built in. That coupled with the fact that you have done this once before, you have some familiarity with what's required to show eligibility. Any recertification, even though it does require some work, should be more, easier than the initial certification to get into the lottery. And on top of that, if you get a little bit of a pay raise during the year, provided it's not huge, you don't have to be concerned that it's going to, necessarily bump you over the income limit. One thing I should also say is I talked about the rents towards the beginning. rents usually do change each year, okay? And that's because rents are tied to area median incomes that are published by HUD each year. Usually they go up. Not always, but usually they go up. It's usually not a huge amount, so from year to year, but again, it depends on the year. But, some years it may go up $20 a month or $30 a month. Other years it could be more than that. Next year in 2021, I can't predict, but I would imagine that it may not go up at all. It may go down. If it does go up, it may not be by very much. But I think the kind of important takeaway is that rents do change each year, and you would be given notice ahead of time of what any new rent would be. But it's not like once you're in, the rent is what it is for eternity. It does fluctuate depending on the numbers published by HUD. What else? So
Can I just ask one more question?
Yeah.
I was just wondering, now when you said once you've completed the application process, after it might take you numerous times, you'll send notification with a lottery number and everything and information. Now, is that going to be emailed, or is it going to be literally mailed out to you through the U.S. mail?
Okay, so the question is from the caller to anyone on YouTube is about the method of communication when we are communicating with you. We prefer email. We will do postal mail. We'll do, you can fax stuff. Email is definitely our preferred method. And if you give us an email, that is how we will communicate with you, unless you tell us that, we shouldn't and there's some other way. But email is the fastest, and then there's kind of a paper trail, so to speak, of what we've talked about. And so, most people have email now, and if you do, I would encourage you to use that with us, because that is probably the easiest. But yeah, so if you have email, if your lottery application is complete and you're eligible, we will email you an eligibility notice.
What? So let me just ask you about because I'm going to say I already did my application, and then I had to drop something off because it was, like you said, a few documents they needed extra, and I did last week, and I'm going back and forth with Jane because they couldn't find them, and I dropped them in the lockbox. But she says, yes, I got them. I really haven't gotten clarification, but I'm just wondering, so how many days before I get some type of confirmation? Because I just want to make sure they got everything and I get the lottery number. So how long before I would get that type of confirmation?
It should only be, so the question is about kind of turnaround times, communication times from us. It should only be 2 or 3 days, usually. So if you've dropped everything off a couple days ago, you should expect to hear from us very soon.
Okay.
It shouldn't be like a week, it should be 3 days, maybe 4 days in that area.
Yeah, I haven't heard anything, and then I had reached out to them today, and she says, well, somebody got them, but I'm sort of confused to see if somebody actually got the other documents they had requested from me or not. So that's why, because I give myself enough leeway. I want to give myself a month because, like you said, they are tedious. It's not usually done on a first try. So
yeah. No, if you don't hear something, if it's been like 4 days and you haven't heard anything, please get in touch with us and we will get you an answer. Okay?
Okay, sure. Thank you.
Sure. Does any of the folks who are watching on YouTube, does anyone have any questions about anything I've said or anything I didn't cover that you want me to talk about? I'm happy to do that. Or if you kind of have the picture, I think that I've gone through kind of the biggest points from the application and the lottery and kind of what to expect. If you have additional questions, you can always reach out to us. info@sebhousing.com. It's on the first page of the application. or you can call us. Our number's also in the info pack in the application. So, don't worry if there's something you think of later and you want to ask us, please reach out. But again, most important thing I can say is you may have just heard the caller kind of mention, usually people don't get a totally complete application on the first try. So this is a great opportunity to get rental housing at significantly below what it would be on the market. Can't stress enough, get the application in, sufficiently ahead of July 31st so that if anything's missing, you will have sufficient time to get it and aren't sort of scrambling around. I'll hang out for a sec just to see if anyone has any questions, but if not, thanks for tuning in. I hope this was informative and helpful. Again, you can reach out to us with any questions, and we hope to see your application soon if you haven't submitted it already.
All right, thank you so very much.
You got it. Thanks for tuning in.
All right, bye-bye.
Good night. Okay, it doesn't look like anyone has a question, so thank you again for tuning in and have a great night. And you can certainly reach out later if anything comes up that you're hoping to ask us. So thanks again. Good night.